What'll be King Aegon II Targaryen's fate in the House of the Dragon? What is his character like in Fire and Blood? The Targaryen civil war is flourishing in full rage, and while it may seem the Greens have dominated the Blacks so far, that's really not it. We saw 3 dragons and a king flying in for the battle at Rook's Rest, but out of them all, only 1 dragon seemed to have made it out unharmed. Would you really call that a victory, Team Green? Sure, Queen Rhaenyra lost her strongest ally, Princess Rhaenys, and the biggest dragon they had, but her chief rival, King Aegon II Targaryen, is now bedridden and barely breathing after he was almost roasted alive by Vhagar, all thanks to his own brother, Prince Aemond. Even if the Greens have managed to struggle his half-charred body back to the Red Keep, what happens to him now? Especially after his lawless jerk of a brother, who would go to any lengths to seize the power of the Iron Throne, has been named as the regent by the small council. Of course, the book readers of Fire and Blood are very well aware of what befalls House Targaryen at the end of the Dance of the Dragons, but the ones who are only following the show are basking in the dark about the usurper's fate, now that he's mostly unconscious with most of his body covered in burns. Not just that, we even saw how Aegon seems to have lost one of his eyes, and is suffering from many internal injuries after most of his bones have broken from the fall. This painfully horrific sight has made the show fans ask only one question so far: does King Aegon even survive the dance? Well, lucky for you, we're about to discuss what happens to Aegon's character at the end of the Civil War. Unless the showrunners and writers of House of the Dragon decide to change the ending, this video will be ridden in spoilers from the beginning to the end, and in case you're planning to avoid that, I suggest you hit pause right about now. Now that all of you have been alerted, without wasting another moment, let's discuss how King Aegon the Elder's character differs in Fire and Blood. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Prince Aegon's early life and youth as documented in Fire and Blood. According to Fire and Blood, Aegon Targaryen was born in 106 AC, in the same year as his parents King Viserys I Targaryen and his second wife Queen Alicent Hightower got married. The king and queen had 3 more children over the years, so Aegon had 2 younger brothers and a sister. Now, Aegon was actually named by Alicent after Aegon the Conqueror, and even after Aemond, Daeron and Helaena were born, Viserys refused to change his line of succession from his first daughter Rhaenyra. A year before he was born, King Viserys had already announced Princess Rhaenyra as his heir, in an elaborate ceremony where hundreds of knights and lords were summoned to swear their obeisance to her and to take an oath to defend her claim to the throne when the time comes. Even after Viserys had a son, he never changed his verdict to name Rhaenyra as his heir, and this bit really pissed off the Hightowers, who believed Rhaenyra would always be the king's favourite child, no matter what Alicent and her children did. As mentioned in one of the semi-canon sources, Aegon shared the exact Targaryen features of his father, Viserys I Targaryen, and looked a lot like him. While Prince Aegon grew up to be a handsome young man, he always had a pouty mouth and a sullen look in his eyes. Unlike most Targaryens, the prince had a wispy mustache instead of a beard, and overall he didn't exactly make the cut for having the appearance of a warrior. But Aegon was famous for being short-tempered and holding grudges. By the time he was 15, he was known to be a lazy and somewhat sulky boy, prone to overeating and drinking too much ale and strong wine, so much so that these habits manifested into his adulthood as he raged on in alcoholism. Apparently, Prince Aegon loved sweet Arbor red wine and spent most of his youth intoxicated by it. The entire realm knew how promiscuous Viserys' oldest son was, because just like in the show, Aegon was known to sexually harass any serving girl or maid who made the mistake of straying into his reach. These endeavors often left Alicent to clean up the mess her son had left behind in a drunken state, and as a result, Aegon even went on to father several bastards that he simply had no clue of. While Aemond detested his brother for being unworthy to be the first in line of succession, Daeron was always kind to both his brothers, given that he was the youngest son and the last in the succession race. As the years passed, Aegon's mother grew frustrated with the thought of Rhaenyra taking the Iron Throne one day over her son. When the king's hand and her father, Otto Hightower, kept pushing Viserys to change the line of succession, as it is customary for the first son to be the right heir, Viserys realized that the Hightowers were trying to put their blood on the throne, and as a result, he stripped Otto from his office, abdicating him from being the hand of the king. After Alicent saw all her plans backfiring at her, she tried to convince her husband to marry Aegon to his half-sister Rhaenyra, but Viserys knew better, because the siblings were 10 years apart in age and were never seen to get along. He also knew that his wife only proposed this marriage as the last measure to get Aegon on the Iron Throne, so he joined houses with the Velaryons and married Rhaenyra to the sea snake Lord Corlys' heir, Sir Laenor Velaryon. The initial cold rift between the Greens and the Blacks. Just like we saw in the House of the Dragon, as the years passed, Alicent grew more resentful toward Rhaenyra, to a point that everyone around them began to take notice of it. Naturally, tensions at Viserys' court only grew by the day as the lords started choosing sides between Alicent and Rhaenyra. Many supported the laws from the Great Council of 101 AC under King Jaehaerys, the Conciliator, which declared that the Iron Throne couldn't go to a woman. As the House Targaryen split into 2 different factions, they came to be known as the Greens and the Blacks. Given that the color of House Hightower was green, green. Aegon's side of the family were known as the Green faction. Meanwhile, Rhaenyra's supporters were called Blacks because of the traditional colors of House Targaryen. Now, the hostility between Queen Alicent and Princess Rhaenyra had gotten so bitter that it extended to their children. Aegon and his brothers didn't get along with their Velaryon nephews and resented their mother for stealing what they saw as their birthright, as a woman had never ruled on the Iron Throne before. Plus, Prince Aegon believed that Rhaenyra's 3 Velaryon sons were actually fathered by her sworn sword, Sir Harwin Strong, instead of her husband, Sir Laenor Velaryon. He also went on to share this belief with his brother Aemon, which often led the brothers to team up and tease their nephews for being bastards. Even though the 6 boys often attended the same feasts, balls, and revels, while training together under the same master at arms and studying under the same maesters, they never got along. No matter how much time they spent together, these boys could never manage to form a bond, which led the infighting to grow out of control. According to one of the historians, Archmaester Gildain, no matter how much the king forced Aegon and his siblings to be close to Rhaenyra's sons, it only made their mutual dislike worse. By the time he was 13, Prince Aegon had become a dragon rider after successfully bonding with a beautiful young dragon named Sunfire. Meanwhile, both Princess Rhaenyra's husband and her uncle Daemon's wife passed away, so in 120 AC they decided to get married, much to Alicent's annoyance. Later, Rhaenyra had a son with her uncle husband Daemon Targaryen, whom she named Aegon. It's said that she intended to play this move as a slight towards her half-brother, Prince Aegon, and to mock his mother, Queen Alicent. Later, in 122 AC, following the ancient Targaryen tradition, Prince Aegon the Elder married his sister, Princess Helaena Targaryen, in King's Landing. While he wasn't exactly very happy to marry his delusional sister, Aegon was pretty much forced by his mother to do so. A year after their marriage, Helaena gave birth to her twins, Prince Jaehaerys and Princess Jaehaera. It's said that around the same time, Aegon also fathered 2 bastards. One of them was a boy born from a random girl whose maidenhead was won by the prince at an auction in the Street of Self, and his second child was a girl he'd fathered with one of his mother's servants at the Red Keep. Following this, in 127 AC, Helaena and Aegon had their youngest son, Prince Maelor. As all of their lives went on, so did King Viserys' efforts to fix the relationship between Aegon, his siblings, and their Velaryon nephews. While he always insisted his son to take the higher ground and be on friendlier terms with their nephews, Alicent somehow always influenced her sons to act in the worst possible manner. When the king held a feast to celebrate the return of his good health on the first day of 127 AC, Prince Jaehaerys Velaryon asked Princess Helaena for a dance, and that was something that just didn't sit well with Prince Aegon. He was so offended that he bowled into an argument with his nephew, and would probably even have fought him if the Kingsguard hadn't stepped in. Beginning of the Targaryen Civil War, the Dance of the Dragons. When King Viserys I Targaryen died in 129 AC, Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen was still the heir to the Iron Throne. However, she was pregnant with her 3rd child and was at Dragonstone with her family when her father passed away. So, this gave the Greens in King's Landing an upper hand, as they kept Viserys' death a secret from the entire realm. In the books, Alicent and Otto left Viserys' body to rot in his chambers for 7 whole days, in order to hide the proof of his death until they were ready to crown Aegon. The entire small council was on board to recognize Aegon as the new ruler of the 7 kingdoms, except for Lord Lyman Beesbury, who swore by the late king's wish to see his oldest daughter ascend the throne after him. Well, sadly it didn't end well for old man Beesbury, as Otto had him arrested and thrown into the dark cells where he died of a chill. When Alicent finally summoned Aegon to the Green Council, the Kingsguard couldn't find him inside the rooms the prince shared with his wife Helaena. According to Grand Master Munkin's true telling, Aegon was found at his revels. But then, according to the court fool Mushroom's scandalous documentation, Aegon's so-called revels were actually inside a flea-bottom rat pit, where certain people amused themselves by watching feral children fight each other for money. The prince was found drunk as a fiddler beside this fighting pit, while being pleasured by a young girl in a naked state. Fire and Blood also documented a 3rd account from Septon Eustace, who was a staunch supporter of the Green faction and was biased enough to paint Aegon in a positive light. So, according to his not-so-reliable documentation, Aegon was found in his bed with his very well-kept lover or mistress, who was actually the daughter of a rich trader. Septon Eustace also mentioned that apparently Prince Aegon insisted that he couldn't usurp the Iron Throne, as Rhaenyra was the late king's true heir, and refused to take any part in Alicent's ploy to crown him as the king. But his mind changed only after the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Sir Criston Cole, convinced Aegon that if Rhaenyra ever became the queen, she'd have him and his brothers executed to secure the future of her rule. Apparently, as Eustace said, the only reason Aegon took the crown and became the king was to save his family, whom he loved very much. Now, as the Green Council was busy plotting how to win over the great houses to Aegon's side, the prince grew impatient with all the secrecy and demanded to be crowned immediately. So, on the 10th day of the 3rd moon in 129 AC, the death of King Viserys I was finally announced to all of the 7 kingdoms, followed by Aegon being declared as the new king. Aegon's coronation ceremony was arranged to take place inside the Dragon Pit, in front of the public eye, and on the chosen day, Sir Criston, known as the Kingmaker, placed Aegon the Conqueror's silver and ruby crown on the prince's head, declaring him as the new king of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. With the elderly High Septon now living in Old Town, it was Septon Eustace who stepped in to anoint and bless King Aegon II Targaryen as the rightful ruler of the Iron Throne. While King Aegon and the Green faction now ruled the capital, Sir Steffon Darklyn of the Kingsguard fled to Rhaenyra at Dragonstone, taking the crown of her father, King Viserys I, along with him. After hearing the news of her father's death and her right to the throne being usurped by the Hightowers, Rhaenyra slipped into a dark rage that caused her to go into an unnaturally early labor. When her only daughter Visenya was born, the child was deformed and stillborn, and Rhaenyra blamed this tragic incident on the usurpers who had stolen her crown. But after recuperating, she didn't waste time and quickly arranged a coronation of her own in Dragonstone itself. Now, in the show, it was Sir Eric Cargill who fled to Dragonstone with King Jaehaerys I and King Viserys I's crown to bend the knee to Rhaenyra. But in Fire and Blood, it was actually Sir Steffon Darklyn who fled to Dragonstone alongside a few other black supporters. Soon, Rhaenyra was crowned by her uncle husband, Prince Daemon Targaryen, who named her as the rightful queen of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. On the other hand, Aegon enjoyed the wealth and support of King's Landing, Old Town, and Lannisport, along with the backing of houses Hightower, Lannister, and Baratheon. He also presented a strong appearance of legitimacy by wearing the Conqueror's crown, wielding the Valyrian steel sword Blackfire, and regularly holding council while sitting on the Iron Throne. When King Aegon and the Green Council heard about how Rhaenyra held a coronation ceremony at Dragonstone and was declared as the queen to contest his claim, Aegon II Targaryen was furious and demanded the heads of her and Prince Daemon to be brought to him. However, it was Grand Maester Orwyle who convinced the king to let him offer the peace terms to Rhaenyra by personally visiting Dragonstone. So, the king sent her terms that allowed Rhaenyra and all her descendants to rule Dragonstone, only if she renounced all her claims to the Iron Throne. But Rhaenyra was determined not to be denied of her right to the crown and disputed Aegon's claim to the throne, knowing pretty well that a civil war was inevitable. This further pissed off King Aegon, and the realm was now divided into two solid factions: the Greens, who supported Aegon, and the Blacks, who supported Rhaenyra. Thus, the Targaryen civil war we know as the Dance of the Dragons began. The murder of King Aegon II Targaryen's heir. So, at the beginning of the dance, Queen Rhaenyra's second son, Prince Lucerys Velaryon, flew to Storm's End, arriving on his dragon, Arrax, just as a storm was brewing. Prince Aemond and his dragon Vhagar were already there to secure Lord Baratheon's support for the Greens. While Aemond tried to provoke Lucerys into a fight, mocking him and calling him a strong bastard, Lucerys, who had promised his mother about not engaging in any fight, refused to take the bait. He delivered his mother's message to Lord Boros Baratheon, but Boros rejected it and asked him to leave. Although Boros stopped Aemond from attacking Lucerys inside the castle, he did allow Aemond to follow him. So, the rash, one-eyed Prince Aemond mounted his dragon and caught up with Lucerys during the raging storm. The battle between their dragons was brief, because Vhagar, being 5 times larger, had the upper hand, leading Arrax to be quickly defeated. After Prince Aemond returned to King's Landing, King Aegon wholeheartedly welcomed his brother by throwing a grand feast for him, given that he ensured an important ally for the Greens and killed off one of Rhaenyra's sons. But Queen Alicent and the Hand of the King, Sir Otto Hightower, were very concerned about Aemond's rashness, believing that it would manifest into horrible consequences. Meanwhile, 3 days later, the head and neck of Arrax washed ashore, along with Lucerys' lifeless body, and Queen Rhaenyra collapsed at the sight of her son's death. During this time, Prince Daemon was at Harrenhal, but he sent a raven with the message that no matter what happened, Lucerys' death would be avenged. Using one of his friends from King's Landing, Daemon enlisted the help of a former sergeant in the City Watch, who was now known only as Blood, and a rat catcher from the Red Keep known only as Cheese. They sneaked into the Red Keep through secret tunnels and hidden doors, making their way to the Tower of the Hand, where they bound and gagged Queen Alicent after strangling her bedmaid. Later, when Queen Helaena and her 3 children entered Alicent's room, Blood and Cheese barred the doors and demanded that Helaena choose which one of her sons would die. In her distress, Helaena reluctantly chose Maelor, as her oldest son Jaehaerys was Aegon's heir, but Blood defied her choice and killed Prince Jaehaerys instead. The 2 murderers then fled with the prince's head, leaving the others unharmed. After the incident, Aegon's sister-wife Helaena swiftly slipped into depression and madness because of the role she was forced to play in the events that led to her son's death. She refused to eat, sleep, bathe, or even leave her room. Helaena also avoided the presence of her youngest son, Maelor, who she'd condemned to die. So, Aegon took Maelor and gave him to be raised by Queen Alicent. The king and queen also began sleeping in separate bedrooms after this, which pushed Helaena deeper into madness, while Aegon tried to forget his rage by drinking. While Blood was caught and tortured to death, they never managed to track down Cheese. So, as a solution, Aegon ordered the execution of every rat catcher in the city and hung their bodies from the gates of the castle for the public to see. King Aegon II Targaryen rides into his first battle along with his dragon, Sunfire. So, there was a lot going on in the Riverlands as all the lords broke out into a civil war within themselves sometime after Daemon took Harrenhal. This led the Green faction to face a series of defeats in the region, prompting Sir Otto to try to secure more allies by writing letters to them and hiring sellswords to fight for the king. Aegon, however, mistook Otto's efforts for inaction and saw his caution as cowardice. With House Velaryon, House Stark, House Arryn, and many of the Riverlords supporting his sister, Aegon turned to Strongwynd to drown his growing fears. He basically grew paranoid with every passing day. Meanwhile, Corlys Velaryon, the Lord of the Tides, was blockading King's Landing. So, in desperation, Otto reached out to the Triarchy and the Lord of the Iron Islands, Dalton Greyjoy, for help. But the king grew frustrated with his grandfather's delays in waging war and removed Otto from his position as Hand, giving the role to Sir Criston Cole. This was probably one of the worst mistakes King Aegon ever made. Anyways, following Criston, the Kingmaker's advice, Aegon had nobles loyal to Rhaenyra brought before the king's justice. Those who refused to pledge loyalty to Aegon were brutally executed. But it was still not enough, as Aegon wanted to launch a direct attack on Dragonstone, and luckily his council somehow managed to talk him out of it. As the situation worsened, Sir Criston Cole believed that they needed to make quick and decisive actions. So he led a host through the Crown Lands, first bolstering their numbers by adding on the forces of Rosby and Stokeworth, whose lords had very recently pledged their loyalty to the Greens and now had to prove their allegiance to Aegon. Criston then moved on to Duskendale, where he sacked the town and had Lord Gunther Darklyn beheaded for supporting Rhaenyra. Afterward, he turned his attention to Rook's Rest, as House Staunton had also pledged their support to Rhaenyra. But even after seeing an overwhelming number of Green forces marching towards Rook's Rest, Lord Staunton stood his ground against the attackers and sent a raven to Dragonstone for help. In response, Princess Rhaenys soon arrived on her dragon Meleys to Rook's Rest. Criston's men, however, were prepared and launched an assault on the dragon using scorpions, longbows and crossbows during the battle at Rook's Rest in 129 AC. As Sir Criston took to the offensive side, King Aegon himself joined the field in a trap set by his Hand at Rook's Rest. When both Sunfire and Vhagar joined the fray, the dragons battled 1,000 feet above the ground. While Meleys clamped her jaws around Sunfire's neck, Vhagar attacked them, causing all three dragons to crash to the ground. From the wreckage, it was only Vhagar who managed to get out of the battle unscathed. Sunfire was left with one wing half torn from his body, while his rider, King Aegon II, suffered multiple broken bones and severe burns that covered more than half of his body, along with more than a few broken ribs. But even after this, the Greens won, as the queen who never was, Princess Rhaenys, was found completely burned, lying next to her dead dragon, Meleys. After the battle, Prince Aemond and Criston took Rook's Rest and executed the garrison. Following this, they openly paraded the head of Meleys back to King's Landing, which terrified the small folk and caused thousands of them to flee the capital, because according to them, the death of a dragon was a horrible omen. As a result, Dowager Queen Alicent eventually had to bar the gates of the city to keep order and prevent anyone from leaving. Meanwhile, Aegon was in a horrifying condition, barely clinging on to life. His armor had literally melted into his left arm from the dragon fire. Not even the best maesters of the realm could say how long it would take for the king to recover. They always pumped him with milk of the poppy to help with the pain, and that clouded the king's mind, leading him to sleep all through the day. For a whole year, Aegon didn't get up from his bed, and many say that while writhing in pain, the king constantly prayed for his death. During this time, nobody other than his mother, Queen Alicent, and his hand, Sir Criston Cole, were allowed to visit the king's chambers. In Aegon's absence, his brother, Aemon, took over his reign of the Seven Kingdoms as the Prince Regent and the protector of the realm. It's said that because of his fall at Rook's Rest, King Aegon had a bent and twisted stature for the rest of his life, with burn scars that covered most parts of his body. His once handsome face had now puffed up due to the side effects of constantly being under the influence of milk of the poppy. Aegon would later use wine to dull his pain from the injuries and burns that he suffered. According to Grand Maester Caith, the king had become greedy and never knew joy or peace in his life ever since he usurped his half-sister's claim to the Iron Throne. The fall of King's Landing. King Aegon II Targaryen had no role to play in the next few battles following Rook's Rest, as he was mostly confined to his bed, healing from his injuries while his brother and his hand ruled on his behalf. After the Triarchy attacked the ship carrying Queen Rhaenyra's two youngest sons, Prince Aegon the Younger and Prince Viserys, Prince Jacaerys flew in on Vermax to save his brothers. But unfortunately, Jacaerys and Vermax met a brutal end in the process. While Aegon the Younger managed to escape with his dragon, he left Prince Viserys behind, who was taken hostage under Admiral Shirako Lohar of Lys. Now, the death of Prince Jacaerys and the assumed death of Prince Viserys filled the queen with rage and hatred, so she finally decided to make full use of her dragons. With Criston Cole, Aemon Targaryen and Vhagar away from King's Landing, Daemon Targaryen and Caraxes joined Rhaenyra and Syrax above the capital, while Corlys Velaryon's ships sailed into the Blackwater Bay. Even though Grand Maester Orwyle tried to send ravens asking for help, he was arrested before he could send any letters. All the messengers were captured at the city gates, and the 7 captains in charge of the gates were either killed or arrested by gold cloaks who were still loyal to Daemon, who had once commanded them. The gates were then opened for the men arriving with the Velaryon fleet, leading King's Landing to fall in less than a day. However, before Rhaenyra could take the king hostage, Lord Larys Strong secretly smuggled Aegon and his children out of the city. Aegon disguised himself as one of the small folk and escaped on a fishing boat. Larys advised him to go to Dragonstone, as he'd be hiding right underneath his sister's nose without any suspicion. Larys then sent Princess Jaehaera with Sir Willis Fell to Storm's End, and Prince Maelor with Sir Rickard Thorne to Lord Ormond Hightower, in order to keep them safe. The fall of Dragonstone. After Aegon eventually arrived on Dragonstone, he managed to convince several blacks to defect from Rhaenyra's cause and help him seize the island. Now, Dragonstone wasn't very well defended when the Queen was consolidating her power at King's Landing. After Sir Alfred Brome betrayed Rhaenyra for not naming him as her castellan, Aegon stormed into Dragonstone. During the fall of Dragonstone, Aegon fought Princess Baela Targaryen as both of them were mounted on their dragons. While Lady Baela somehow escaped her attackers because of Moondancer, her dragon was blinded by Sunfire's dragonfire. When Sunfire and Moondancer crashed to the ground, Aegon tried to jump off his dragon's back, and as a result, the king shattered his legs, hurting himself once again. After Sunfire killed Moondancer, Lady Baela was taken captive by King Aegon, who had now seized Dragonstone. Given that he was protected by Sir Marston Waters on his journey to Dragonstone, the king named the bastard as a knight to his Kingsguard. Unfortunately, because of his broken legs, Aegon lived with great pain for the rest of his life, but still refused any milk of the puppy due to his previous experience with it after Rook's Rest. When Grand Maester Gerardis pushed the king to consume milk of the puppy for his pain, Aegon distrusted him and ordered him to be fed to his dragon, although he kept Gerardis's upper torso and hung it on the battlements as a grim welcome for his half-sister. Meanwhile, Criston Cole had lost his life at Butcher's Ball, and Otto Hightower was beheaded by Queen Rhaenyra when she took King's Landing. But she spared Queen Alicent and Aegon's wife, Queen Helena, even if she locked them up in the Dark Cell. A short while after Aegon seized Dragonstone, he received the news that his sister-wife committed suicide in her cell out of anguish, while his only living son, Prince Maelor, was killed by a rogue mob at Bitterbridge. Now, nobody knew that Aegon had taken Dragonstone. While his legs recovered, Aegon's brother Aemond fought his uncle at the Battle above the God's Eye and lost his life. Daemon met his end fighting this battle, and even if his body was never found, his death was confirmed when the body of his dragon Caraxes washed up ashore. With her husband now dead, Rhaenyra struggled to maintain a hold over the small folk who had grown weary of the war. Led by Trystane Truefire and Sir Perkin the Flea, the rioters of Flea Bottom stormed the dragon pit and killed all the dragons, causing a major twist in the war. After Queen Rhaenyra's council convinced her that she had lost the city, she left King's Landing with her son on the very next day. Unaware of Aegon's coup, the Queen was naturally captured when she arrived at the gates of Dragonstone. Once Sir Alfred Brome brought Rhaenyra to Aegon, the king declared his half-sister as a traitor and fed her to Sunfire, while her only surviving son, Prince Aegon the Younger, was forced to watch his mother die. Although Sir Alfred Brome suggested killing Prince Aegon too, the king forbade it and imprisoned him in the cells. But even then, the war continued as Rhaenyra's supporters rallied behind Aegon the Younger, despite him being held as a prisoner of Aegon the Elder. However, King Aegon still couldn't return to King's Landing due to the Velaryon fleet blockading Dragonstone with their ships. Later, on the 12th month of 130 AC, Sunfire the Golden succumbed to his injuries on Dragonstone, leaving Aegon pretty heartbroken. But still, he didn't waste time and began plotting his return back to King's Landing so he could take the throne from the commoners who currently held the Iron Throne. The restoration of House Targaryen under King Aegon II. Although Rhaenyra was dead, the Dance of the Dragons was barely over. King Aegon II Targaryen had to get to King's Landing, so he offered House Velaryon a pardon if Aelin Velaryon, the heir of Lord Corlys, swore loyalty to him and allowed him to cross Blackwater Bay. Initially, Aegon had ordered the execution of Princess Baela Targaryen, but he later changed his mind. Instead, he threatened to execute her unless Aelin presented himself before the king and swore allegiance to his cause. When Lord Boros Baratheon finally arrived at King's Landing and took the Iron Throne for King Aegon by overthrowing Trystane Truefire, Dowager Queen Alicent Hightower arranged a marriage between Aegon II and Lady Cassandra Baratheon, Boros's eldest daughter. Given that all of the king's sons were dead and the patriarchal norm abided by the Green faction didn't recognize Princess Jaehaera as Aegon's heir. Meanwhile, Corlys Velaryon agreed to swear loyalty to Aegon and was made to be a part of his small council as the master of ships. As Aegon was preparing to execute Baela again and Aelin was planning an attack on Dragonstone, news of House Velaryon's accord with the Iron Throne reached both sides. Aegon then returned to King's Landing aboard Mouse, a battered cog captained by Aelin's mother Marilda of Hull. According to Mushroom, Aelin chose this ship specifically to insult the king. After King Aegon II finally reached the Red Keep, he couldn't climb the steps of the Iron Throne because of his wounds, and so he held court from a wooden cushioned seat with a blanket covering his twisted legs. Despite his immense pain, Aegon still refused to use dream wine or milk of the puppy to ease his suffering. Instead, he focused on dealing with the three pretender kings in King's Landing. Aegon allowed Trystane Truefire to be knighted before executing him, and spared Gaemon Palehair as he was a 4-year-old child. But still, the king had his followers hanged. After arresting the shepherd, Aegon had his tongue torn out and then burned him to death along with his followers. While Lord Velaryon urged King Aegon to pardon the lords who had supported Rhaenyra, the king instead demanded that those from the Crown lands be brought to him in chains. He then forced them to swear fealty, pay a heavy ransom, and provide hostages to the Crown, which only turned them further resentful toward him. Meanwhile, as the River Lords were marching toward King's Landing, and a large force from the Vale of Arryn was hiring ships to bring them to the capital, King Aegon constantly tried to hatch the dragon eggs he brought from Dragonstone and failed. Lord Corlys then urged Aegon to marry his daughter, Jaehaera Targaryen, to Rhaenyra's only living son, Aegon the Younger. However, Aegon II refused, as he wanted to end his sister's line, and instead he decreed that the young prince would either join the Night's Watch or serve him as a eunuch at King's Landing. King Aegon grew paranoid by the day, and that was reflected in all the decisions he made. The constant pain from his injuries also turned him into a bitter man. When Grand Maester Orwyle realized that the king's right leg wasn't exactly healing very well, he suggested that Aegon should amputate his leg, but the king staunchly refused. His injuries through the years had also left him sexually crippled. According to Mushroom's scandalous documentation, Aegon would watch as one of his favorites coupled with a serving girl or a lady of the court, but later he would weep at his fate and summon Septon Eustace to grant him absolution. His leg injury also left him incapable of walking at first, so he had to be carried around in a litter. Although much later he somehow regained his ability to walk with the help of a crutch by dragging his left leg behind him. The bitter end of King Aegon II Targaryen's reign. As the armies closed in on the capital and his lords plotted and argued, King Aegon II seemed pretty oblivious to the looming danger. Instead, he found solace in thinking about his upcoming marriage to Lady Cassandra Baratheon. The king also ordered the rebuilding of the Dragon Pit and commissioned statues of his late brothers, Daeron the Daring and Aemond One-Eye. Unfortunately, peace didn't last long under Aegon the Elder's reign, as in 131 AC, Kermit Tully, the Lord of Riverrun, and his army had defeated Lord Boros Baratheon in the Battle of the King's Road. With no green armies left and the lads marching on the capital, along with the approaching forces of the Valemen from the east and Cregan Stark, the Lord of Winterfell, from the north, Lord Corlys Velaryon knew that the king's defeat was imminent. He advised King Aegon to abdicate the throne and join the Night's Watch, but Queen Alicent Hightower reminded her son of their hostages, and the king refused. Instead, Aegon ordered that his nephew, Prince Aegon the Younger, have his ear cut off and sent to Lord Tully as a warning. Basically, nobody could make Aegon foresee the inevitable. After having a tiring meeting with the small council, Aegon climbed into his litter and asked to be carried to the royal sept. To ease his pain, he took his customary flagon of sweet Arbor red wine along the way. But when his escort arrived and Sir Giles Belgrave of the Kingsguard lifted the litter's curtains, they found King Aegon II dead, with blood on his lips. With the king now dead, Lord Corlys and an unharmed Aegon the Younger rode out to meet the vanguard of Kermit Tully's host to announce the king's death. Meanwhile, Lord Lewin Corbray, commander of the Arryn host, saw the Velaryon fleet remove Aegon II's banner. Since Aegon II had no male heirs left, his nephew Aegon the Younger was next in line to ascend to the Iron Throne. Rhaenyra's son was then declared as Aegon III Targaryen, the new king of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. He was then married to Aegon II's daughter, Princess Jaehaera Targaryen, which finally united the two branches of House Targaryen and put an end to the infighting. After this, following Targaryen tradition, Aegon II's body was consigned to the flames, with some hoping that the ills and hatreds of his reign would be burned away with his remains. The aftermath of King Aegon II Targaryen's death. Now, the exact identity of the person who poisoned King Aegon II remained unknown, but those deemed responsible were arrested during the Hour of the Wolf, which is the 6-day period during which Lord Cregan Stark of Winterfell acted as the hand of the new king, in order to clean up all the mess that the Targaryen civil war had left behind all across the Seven Kingdoms. He narrowed down Lord Velaryon, Lord Larys Strong, and Sir Perkin the Flea to be the main conspirators, who feared that Aegon II staying on the Iron Throne would lead to the ultimate destruction of the realm, which seemed to be at a never-ending war. While Lord Stark ordered Septon Eustace release, he condemned Grand Maester Orwyle and Sir Giles Belgrave of the Kingsguard. Apart from that, 22 other lesser people at court, mostly under Perkin's command, were sentenced to death under Cregan's rule. He also addressed soldiers from House Strong who had freed Lady Baela Targaryen from captivity. Initially condemning them, he agreed to spare them when Baela herself intervened his judgment while wielding a sword in their defense. Cregan also passed a judgment on Corlys Velaryon, the Lord of the Tides, who claimed he acted for the good of the Seven Kingdoms, and Larys Strong, the Lord of Harrenhal, who offered no defense. After Baela and her sister Rhaena persuaded Prince Aegon to spare Corlys, Cregan agreed, but Larys was not spared and was beheaded on Cregan's orders. He also halted the construction of the statues of Aegon II's brothers, finished repairing the Dragon Pit. Following all his judgments, Cregan chose to personally execute the condemned with ice, the ancestral Valyrian steel greatsword of House Stark, which we saw both Ned Stark and Robb Stark using until Tywin Lannister melted it down in Game of Thrones. Anyways, when Lord Cregan Stark made an exception to allow Sir Perkin the Flea to join the Night's Watch, many others asked to take the black as well, which spared their lives after they were sent to man the wall. So Giles and Larys were the only ones who were executed by Cregan for their roles in the chaos of the Targaryen civil war, before he resigned as the king's hand on the very next day. Cregan left for the north after King Aegon III Targaryen's coronation ceremony, leading to the ultimate end of the Dance of the Dragons. Despite not being a very colourful part of the Targaryen dynasty, history hasn't been kind to Aegon II, much like it hasn't been kind to his half-sister Rhaenyra. In the book, Lives of Four Kings, Grand Maester Caith literally described Aegon as grasping and compared him to some of the worst Targaryen kings, such as the weak King Aenys or the tyrannical King Maegor the Cruel. So much fighting, so much blood being shed, only for both their bloodlines to rule the Iron Throne. What an irony. Anyways, this was the unfortunate fate of King Aegon the Elder in Fire and Blood. At this point, we might just as well call him Aegon the Idiot. Jokes apart, I wonder what kind of changes or alteration House of the Dragon has in store for Aegon's fate. Given how wildly they deviate from the source material, there's a subtle chance for the show to drop our jaws with Queen Rhaenyra taking the Iron Throne once and for all. I don't think that's very likely to happen, but I really wish the dragons didn't have to die. They're pretty much the only ones who don't deserve their fate in this tale. But sadly, my delusions can't stop the inevitable. At this point, I wonder if Aegon will even have a chance to hold his brother Aemond accountable for trying to kill him, given how cooked he is. I doubt we'll hear much from him in the remaining few episodes of Season 2. But what do you guys think of King Aegon II Targaryen's character from Fire and Blood? Let me know in the comment box below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.